Well, I think now I'll go ahead and start. So again, I'm Helena Norberg-Hodge from Local Futures, and we're the organization, a nonprofit organization that's been putting on World Localization Day. This is our second year, and we are trying to make visible this grassroots movement back home to earth and to community. We're coming back to our home. We're coming back to where we were born, where we grew, where we evolved, and who we are. And I'm very, very pleased to be here with some of the great thinkers and activists who are also very aware of the need for the inner transition. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And I'm happy to introduce Alex Jensen, who's been working with Local Futures for decades and who is not only an excellent farmer, but the most amazing researcher. If you want to do a PhD in localization, please go to Local Futures website and you will find the articles, books, films that Alex has basically put together for us. He's a walking library of localization. So thanks so much, Alex, for joining us and helping to chair this session.
Thank you, Helen. I'm not sure if that's all true, but very flattering anyways. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Welcome to this session of the World Localization Day. Actually, the World Localization Week, to be honest, but and more than that, but the World Localization Day event. And this session is Connection at the Heart of Activism. So I am going to be moderating the session, and before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of short housekeeping notes with everyone. Basically, we need to remind everyone to please, whoever isn't speaking, to please remain muted during the session. And then if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. And the chat box is for, chats and comments. But if you do have a question for the speakers, please put it there in the Q&A box. And also, if you could include your name and where you are, that would be great for helping identify you to the speakers. So also, if you'd like to make a chat that is seen by everyone rather than just the panelists, please change the setting on your chat. Unfortunately, this is not done automatically in Zoom to all panelists and attendees. You'll see that little icon there at the bottom of the chat. Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and introduce our three amazing and inspiring and dedicated and passionate guests who we're really honored to have joining us tonight. The first is Shilpa Jain. Shilpa, who is an old friend of mine, is an executive director of YES, former coordinator of Other Worlds, and an activist with Shikshantar, the People's Institute for Rethinking Education and Development, which is based out of India. And she's also the author of numerous books and articles, including Reclaiming the Gift Culture. Our next guest tonight, or this morning, depending on where you are, is Pat McCabe. Pat is a mother, grandmother, artist, activist, writer, ceremonial leader, and international speaker. She campaigns for world peace and the recreation of ecological and social balance. Welcome to you, Pat. And finally, Al-Noor Lada. Al-Noor's work focuses on the intersection of political organizing, systems thinking, structural change, and narrative work. He was the co-founder and executive director of The Rules, a global network of activists. And Al-Noor comes from a Sufi lineage and writes about the crossroads of politics and spirituality in troubled times. Welcome to you as well, Al-Noor. So basically, each of you will have about 10 minutes to share your thoughts on the topic for tonight. And so I think without further ado, I will just hand over the floor to you, Shilpa, if you don't mind starting us off. Is that okay?
I was actually Pat would start us off.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just kind of following the order of introductions that I had. So sorry about that. Yes, Pat. Okay, my bad. Do you mind starting us off?
I think I better. I think I better start us off. We got to get going here. Got a lot to do around here. No. So I'm really so honored to be here and happy to see old friends and meeting some new friends and people that I've heard about. Shilpa is who I'm really talking about there, and get to meet you here at least. So I'll say greetings to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico, or the territory of the Sandia Pueblo people. I'm here at the base of the Sandia Mountains, and I'm here at my mama's house. I was saying, you know, she's 97, and we've been lockdown buddies, and now we're slowly easing into some kind of strange freedom, I guess. And I come from the Dene Nation, so I'll say She'e'iya Tachi Inishli Aro Ashi Ibashishchi Ma'irish Gejne Dashanale. And just telling you my clans. And then I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life. And in that way, I was given the name Wiakpa Najiwi, which translates roughly to womaning, standing, shining. And so I've been saying, you know, that I had translated that to woman stand shining, but now I'm really seeing myself as an energetic. I'm a catalyst. Just even in the nature of my biology, I say my biology gives me a spiritual capacity. And so just working with that a little bit deeper now. So sacred activism here, gosh. You know, I've been working with two things currently. You know, it's always like this constant stream. I think it's the Mother Earth stream of consciousness. It's cosmos stream of consciousness. And then it's just the general roar of humanity on the planet that's always moving through. But the things that I've been thinking about, one thing that I've been really working with, and some of you who've seen some of my talks before know I often bring this into the picture. And this is, some people know it as the medicine wheel. I also call it the sacred hoop of life. And so this is just endless teaching for me. So all these four colors sometimes represent the four different colors of man or humankind. Also the four directions in which we, different cultures from all around the world see different medicines, different animals, different spirit helpers and such lying in each of the four directions. And then actually, if you turn it this way, we also have above and below, and then we have at the very center there, the great mystery. But another way that I look at it is I see that, that every single life form has been given a seat on this sacred hoop of life. And there are some cultures who actually know the order in which they sit on the circle, which I love. And so as I've been thinking about that, I've been thinking, you know, that it takes, every single member has to uphold their part of this sacred hoop, or the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so I feel like that's what we're seeing, right? And so humanity also has a way of upholding our part. We're not the whole hoop. We're not the whole hoop. We're part of the hoop. We have a seat on the hoop. And we also have a way of upholding our part. So I've been really thinking about that. I mean, I've been saying that for a while, but the new dimension that's coming in for me right now is thinking, so it's not only that we have to have a willingness to uphold our part of the hoop, and really there I'm talking about humanity. I feel like everybody else is sort of with the program, all the trees, the whales, the amoeba, they're with the program, but it's us. So we're having to find willingness to decide that we want to uphold our part of the sacred hoop. But I'm also thinking about the nature of consent in that setup. You know, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, you know, that we are this deep interbeing. deep interconnectedness, interrelatedness, interdependence. And so I've been thinking, you know, where every being, every member of this sacred hoop has to have the everything it needs to uphold their part of the sacred hoop. So when we deprive different creatures of their ability to uphold their part, you know, they would do it if they could, but we're interfering with their ability, right? And so when I think about that, it brings up a lot around this idea that this is a construct, this earth construct is a construct of free will, and also, and therefore consent comes into play very, very deeply. And so, and also sovereignty. Every creature has to have the sovereignty, everything it needs, the freedom to enact what I say, it's perfect design for thriving life. And that's how it upholds, it's part of the sacred hoop. So when I look at all the other beings on the hoop, I think, wow, just think about it. Every single one, the way that they conduct their lives, the beaver, the bear, the platypus, every tree, you know, the way that they conduct their life only ever supports all other life. It doesn't ever prevent any other life from fulfilling its perfect design for thriving life. That's really amazing to me. And then when I think about, you know, and every other being contributes to thriving life for all. And so this is an idea that I've really been working with for myself and for humanity. I'm thinking, so how do we uphold our part of this thriving life way in such a way that we support every other life form? We never interfere with any other life form's ability to enact its perfect design for thriving life. I feel like because we are here, there is a way for us to do this. We have a capacity to do this, right? And I feel as though there is also what do I want to say? An understanding that it's possible for us to have. So I've probably already gone through my 10 minutes there. There's one other place that I want to bring up, but I'll bring that up in a little bit later. But so this is my prayer right now, is asking, how do I be that human being that supports all other life, that causes all other life to thrive? And to me, this is what's bringing me into community in a slightly different way right now.
Thank you so much, Pat. That's beautiful. Actually, you didn't use all of your 10 minutes, so you're most welcome to continue if you'd like. But
I'm going to make one more piece here. Then I think I can do it succinctly. It's a little bit late in the day for me, and my brain's a little floaty. But yeah. So the other thing that I've really been working with, and I've had the great pleasure of having some beautiful conversations with Joanna Macy about this. I don't know why, she was the first person I called when it first hit me. But in my community, well, my sons went up to Standing Rock, for those of you who that made such a global impact, and shattered many paradigms, I'm going to say. And I feel like we're witnessing the results of that in all directions. When that event occurred on the planet. And but anyway, when my sons came back from that, you know, we also had water protection to do in our part of the world, on our part of the earth. And when they came back and my sons were ready to start taking action to protect our water, the first thing they did was this group of young men came to me and sought me out and said, "Auntie, we would really like you to come and pray with us before we begin at our meetings. And then if you could come and be a part of it." And so they came back with this ethic that that no action is to be taken until you have the elder women's participation and prayer and blessing. So this was a very new dynamic for my sons, I will say. So thank you to all the elder women at Standing Rock. So this is a big question for me right now, is how do I hold my place as elder woman to be able to, because I feel like in traditional cultures, no one has said this to me exactly, but my sense is that before we ever went to war, and we did go to war, pre-colonization, we had our squabbles, that it fell to the elder women to give that final word, to say, yes, okay, this is called for, because we're the life bringers, and then we're also that wisdom carrier for the community. And so this is something that I'm really working with right now, is to ask myself, how do I reclaim that seat as elder woman to be a counsel and a blessing to the sacred warriors as they are seeing what has to be protected be defiled, and they are feeling the need to take action. So I feel like this is an ancient relationship that we haven't really, that has been sort of cast aside for a while. And I, for one, am in a pretty deep spiritual inquiry about how to remake that particular relationship in our communities and societies.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Pat. Okay, now I think, Shilpa, I will turn it over to you,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
I really wanted to hear Pat first. I was like very excited. So I was like, I can't think about what to say until I hear what Pat said.
That was perfect. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. And thank you, Pat, for that incredible wisdom. I feel so grateful to just be in your presence and receive that, those teachings, that learning. And I feel like what I can offer really just to build on that is where I want to come from. So, so my name is Shilpa. I am based here in Berkeley, Oakland, California, in the US, in Alnoor land. And my peoples are originally from Rajasthan, India. And I've gotten to live and work there for many, many years, and now have been living and working here for many, many years. I have been really committed to looking at what does healing look like in community, and really building upon what Pat just shared. How can we be thriving together, personally, in community, and in then creating systems that allow for all of life to thrive? And I really drew a lot of inspiration initially from this idea of, like, I heard this idea a long time ago: hurt people hurt people. And as I started to explore with more community members around that, it was like, hurt people, and they create systems that hurt people. And so if we can go back and look at the trauma that different people have experienced all through time, and what that trauma led to in the creation of systems of separation, systems of division, racism, genocide, violence, I can see that thread. And then I can also see the thread of healing. And then it sort of came, oh, healing people are healing people, and creating systems that are healing people. And then as we go in deeper and deeper, freeing people are freeing people, and creating systems that are freeing people. And so really trying to think about those different cycles. And I loved your question, Pat, and a question that I often live with in myself is, how can I recognize the suffering that I'm experiencing, have compassion for myself, recognize the places that I've been hurt, and that I'm healing? How can I recognize my role in trying to end the suffering from happening, trying to be part of the healing process, be the change maker, support others who are on the path of expanding healing? How can I recognize myself as also someone who's caused hurt and caused harm, and will continue to do that in ways that I unintentionally am doing, but are still happening? And how can I just see myself as part of all three of these ways of being, and try to be in community and in a good way, and in as much right relationship as I can with myself and others? So a lot of my work has led me to explore that with people, and through the work of Yes, which, not the magazine, I love the magazine, it's excellent, but if you can imagine the magazine coming to life, and the people who are a part of that, who are really part of seeing something positive be able to grow in the world, coming together. My organization, Yes, that's a 31-year-old organization, has been bringing together people in transformative gatherings called jams. And the spirit of the jam is like the spirit of the musician's jam, that every single person has something to offer. They have a gift, they have a unique genius, as Michael Meade would say. They also have their own struggles, they have their pain, they have their grief, they also have their wisdom and their connections, and all of that they bring to the jam. And then each person doing that, we create the circle, and in that sacred circle, as we begin to listen to one another and share with one another our unique voice and connect, something emerges that is so much greater than the sum of the parts. Just like a music jam session, the music could never have been imagined before those voices came together, before those instruments came together. And as those people, those unique beings, as we come together, we co-create something that, you know, leads to previously unimaginable outcomes and higher order solutions. And I think a lot about what, you know, Albert Einstein said many years ago, that you can't solve a system on the same level, the problems on the same level they were created. And I think a lot about like separation and how much separation led to our current situation. You know, in India, you know, the concept of divide and rule is very old, right? And how colonization was practiced. And so what does it look like when we start to practice interconnection? What does it look like when we start to practice self-organization? What does it look like when we start to practice seeing, like really taking the time to see each person and their spirit and their power and their gifts and their brokenness and their struggle, and see the wholeness of each person? And how that seeing and then the weaving and the connecting actually brings forth so much power, so much possibility. So that's what I get to do with beautiful people all over the world. And part of what I've been really thinking about through that is, what does it take to really be in sacred community together? And there are just a few things that maybe I can share in this little time. So the first thing, and I'll offer a little visual here, the first thing that I think it really takes is this recognition of 3 levels of transformation: personal, interpersonal, and systemic. And so the personal, like, who am I? What am I here for? What's going on in my inner world? How do I feel? How is my body feeling? What's going on inside? The inner, also known as the inner, or the internal. And then there's the interpersonal, right? The relationships, the communication, the ways that we see one another, and especially how we build bridges across divides, which could be social divides like race and class and gender, nationality, religion, sexuality, age, so much more. They can also be those personality divides that we don't see each other. Oh, I don't get you. I don't know what you're about. And so all of those places where we can divide on our inner side, we can also divide in the interpersonal. And then those are also all the places and the possibilities of connection. And then there's the systemic transformation. Like the world that we're living, the world that we're co-creating, it's our ecosystems, it's our cosmos, right? It's our political, economic, social, educational systems. And these all are intersecting at any moment. They're all showing up in a community. They're all showing up in a sacred space. They're showing up also when we're not, you know, in a sacred space. And so can we start to reimagine and see and understand, like, in any moment, here's where I am, here's how we are, and here's what we're living through. And if we can slow down and give space for all of these fields of transformation, so much can come through. So often it wants to be just one thing or the other. Oh, we're going to look outward and not look inward, or just look inward and not, you know, and when we can bring all 3 together, something very powerful starts to happen in community. The second thing I really want to share about is that I think in sacred activism, as part of that, like this letting go of the idea of the leader out there on their own, figuring it all out, and the pressure and the weight on them. And so really cultivating systems of support. I think about it as collaboration and co-liberation, that we need to be seeing one another, knowing that each of us can bring something forward, and that in that process, we can heal, we can grow, we can liberate possibilities for ourselves and each other and our world. And then the third thing I want to share about is how we approach conflict is so vital in our work in community. And that's one that I think often gets missed. It's something I'm particularly passionate about, because I've really recognized that conflict is neutral. And if I can see conflict as an opportunity to deepen and do that together, so much more can come through. And so one more little quick visual here, and then I'll wrap up, is this idea of our comfort, stretch, and panic zone. And so in the personal, in the interpersonal, and the systemic, all of these zones are operational, and they're working all the time. So where I feel comfortable, it's all the things that I know, I'm familiar with. The only issue is I can't grow or learn there because it's all familiar. So I have to get in that stretch zone, which by definition is uncomfortable, And it's where I'm listening. It's where I'm learning. It's where I can collaborate and co-liberate because I'm present and I'm in my heart space. I'm able to kind of connect to what's happening in the present moment. And then there's the panic zone. And that's the space where I just stop listening. I'm not present anymore. I've gone into my fight or flight. I've gone into the future. I've gone into the past. I'm just not there. And this is happening all the time. These zones are present all the time inside of me, in my relationships, in our world. We see whole institutions operating in panic zone right now. And we also see communities coming together in stretch zone, and also people struggling where their panic zone has become, their comfort zone has become their panic zone, and it's just become very familiar. So the issue for me is like, can we start to see the opportunity to meet conflict in our stretch zone? That can take these breakdowns that are happening all around us and convert them into breakthroughs. And what that takes from each one of us in slowing down, in deeply listening, in naming our truths and sharing our truths, and in coming together and seeing the whole. And really a restorative and transformative model that by listening, by connecting, by seeing the whole, we can come through to the other side and find something that is the thriving world, the thriving lives that Pat was just sharing about. So I'll pause there. I think that's my 10 minutes, and thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Shilpa. I love those visuals, actually. The comfort zone is, I've been hanging out in the comfort zone probably a little more than I should. But I love it. To get into the stretch zone. All right, Alnoor, if you're ready, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, beautiful to hear you, Shilpa, and always beautiful to hear Pat. I get to hear Pat often, but it still never feels like enough, you know. And thank you for being a good elder and a good teacher. And when the question came of talking about sacred activism, I kind of sat with it and I thought, I'm not sure I know what sacred activism is in many ways, you know, and because it's kind of emerging, right? And it's also ancient, and it's not just the sacred part of it, right? It's not just prayer, and it's also not just activism. And part of my sort of internal reflections have been really, I guess, 4 insights. One of them was in order to start to approach whatever sacred activism is or is becoming, really starts from being a good student of our culture. And when I say our culture, I mean the dominant culture. That if we don't have a structural analysis, if we don't have a constellational worldview on how the economic operating system of late-stage capitalism is operating, and therefore how it also operates in our bodies, it's very hard to create a commensurate response. And I often hear people who are in the world of like social entrepreneurship, for example, talk about how their work is changing the world. And part of me is like, well, you know, every dollar of wealth created heats up the planet. It doesn't matter how that money is made. You know, of every dollar of wealth created, about 93 cents ends up in the hands of the top 1%. So by definition, wealth creation creates inequality and it creates poverty. And so if we don't really understand the structure of the global system and what it is to be in a growth-based, self-terminating logic, essentially, there's really no way out. And the implication for sacred activism is that we actually have to spend time in contemplation about the oxygen itself, which is neoliberal capitalism. And the way we spend a lot of time, especially in spiritual communities, reading self-help books and going to workshops and retreats, I think we need to spend equally as much time in reflection and contemplation about the very structure of the system that is determining every aspect of our lives, from where we live to how we're spending our time to who's around us, at least in socioeconomic and race terms. There's a whole invisible architecture going on. And yeah, that was really like the first reflection was was around how do we be good students of our culture in order to be in service to this emerging being of sacred activism. And then the second was to also practice then disidentification from that dominant culture. Because if we still want the validation of a psychotic culture, of a life-destroying culture, and we want Wikipedia pages and certain financial rewards and all of these things, then we're not going to be able to change that system, right? Because the logic of the system is it finds the people that best serve its logic and pulls them to the top. There is no merit system. It's the opposite, right? And what is the logic of the system? Well, we just have to look around us, right? It's short-termist, greedy, selfish, extractive, psychotic, etc. And then that culture pulls the people who best serve the logic to the top. And so instead of like looking at the New York Times magazine or Fortune or CNN or whatever with any form of reverence, what I'm learning is not necessarily to see it with disdain, but to see it as it is, which is these are the organs and apparatuses of a life-destroying machine. And it's actually in some ways very difficult practice to want to disidentify from this thing where everything in culture is pushing you to want that, right? Whether it's the 4,000 advertising messages a day, or our parents' programming, or our ideas of success or purpose or competence. Like that programming is so deep that it does require a somatic integration. It requires seeing it for what it is, and then actively finding these parts in our body that have been colonized by a logic that will find any form of dissent and co-opt it and sell it back to us. And so it's such a tricky, seductive system, and the culture is geared to not be able to leave that seduction, essentially. And then it plays out in our daily lives, right? From what we consume and how we consume it. And I think part of that, at least what supports me in the disidentification from the system, is to spend time in contemplation about the consequences of that system, right? Just like the sheer amount of calories that are required to prop up one Western life. It's so enormous, right? And the sheer amount of work to just keep this whole house of cards, this whole Ponzi scheme up is just like, it's such an immense amount of work, right? From fossil fuel extraction to globalized supply chain to the dehumanizing and really diminishment of all other life. And then, part of this, I guess the next thing from disidentification then becomes trying to be in a practice of transcending subject-object duality. And so what does that mean? Well, in traditional Cartesian terms, I'm the subject, and everything I view is an object outside of me, because the very logic of the Western Occidental mind is steeped in the binary of myself and other. And if that's embedded in the language, in the culture, in the education system, in the media, and everything that happens in Western culture, literally everything, it's not an exaggeration to say that, reifies the individual identity, right? From passports to names and what it does is it strengthens identity. And in most mystical traditions and many indigenous traditions, there's many practices, from initiations to dancing to yoga to tantra to psychedelic plant medicines, etc., that their sole purpose of these initiations and these rites of passage is to transcend subject-object, to transcend the idea of the individual identity, so then we can be reborn in service to the collective field. And when we look at especially activist spaces and environments, the sense of identity is really strong. And so these victim perpetrator cycles start being created, where because we've been othered, we then other, right? As Shilpa said, hurt people hurt people. And Pat, in other contexts, has used the language of lateral violence. And part of I think what is happening, especially in political activist spheres, is people are starting to understand that there is no separation between the internal and the external, and we're trying to create these prefigurative utopian post-capitalist realities, and yet we treat the people around us quite poorly often, and then we wonder why the world we want to create is not being created. And even the identification with our traumas and our wounds, not to say that they're not important or necessary, but like with all identification, there's a certain value in that identification, and then there comes a point where there's also value in non-identification, and we're often quite attached to our traumas because we identify with them, and it's understandable. And yet I'm starting to understand how much of an obstacle that is from creating the world that many of us have been fighting for, or worlds is probably more accurate. And then the last thing I'd say is what I've been learning and practicing in the work of sacred activism is like, this is not a compartmentalized aspect of our lives. And if the dominant culture could be described as a materialist, rationalist culture, where we can understand the world in terms of reduction, right? The entire world can be broken down into the atom, and the atom can be broken down into the proton and the neutron and the electron, and now we know everything, right? And the mind is the ultimate arbiter of what reality is, right? This highly subjective, atomized mind with deep trauma and deep programming is somehow going to understand the entire infinite cosmos in its grandness, right? This is the kind of ridiculousness we're sort of fed. And then we wonder why all of this is happening around us. The sort of antidote to that in some ways is animism, which is the root of many mystical traditions, many indigenous traditions, which is the sense that the universe is alive. We are in dialogue with the living planet. And I find it quite difficult to practice sacred activism as if it's like a job or a thing you do or one aspect of our lives, and then turn around and see the world as dead matter, right? And so I think the practice of animism in many ways is the antidote to rationalism and materialism. And it also allows us to enter a different relationship of dialogue and a relationship of permission, and a relationship where we're allowing ourselves to become more contextually sensitive to the omens of the universe and the living planet. And if we're more contextually sensitive, then we can be more contextually relevant. And yeah, I think in many ways that's our practice to cultivate a deeper sacred activism. Yeah, and I think my time is probably up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alnoor. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Helena, yes, please. I think I'd like to respond to some of the comments, and then we'll open it up to more of a dialogue.
I know I'm just bursting to comment on everything as usual. But very grateful for that stretch zone. I actually do think most people are hanging out in the stretch zone today because of the emergencies and crises that we're all facing. So I think we're hanging out there a lot, and let's hope we don't move into the panic zone, and that we do remember. I think the hoop image is also so helpful, Pat and Alnoor. I think it's extremely helpful that you do remind us that we need to understand the dominant culture we're swimming in, and it is this techno-economic system that's shaping that culture. So it's very, very important that we become literate in that. And I feel that this is, it's sort of a last piece of what needs to happen to make our activism much more strategic. There's often too much focus on the national theater of politics. And of course, as we've all been saying, far too much focus on individual change in terms of, if I change my consumer behavior, including my investments, what I buy, I will change the world. And we are trying to encourage a shift in thinking towards looking at changing the I to a we, so that we're looking at what can we do at the community level to create different structures. And then we're saying, in order to be thoroughly literate, very much along the lines of what you're saying, Alnoor, we need to understand that dominant system much better. And as you say, to be able to disentangle ourselves from it. However, just a couple of things, I try not to be too long, but one of the things I want to say is that my sort of Bible, my absolute, my Bible is this indigenous culture that I lived in, and I spoke the language fluently, that was so healthy, so peaceful, so feminine. I mean, women had a much stronger position in real terms than they did in my native culture of Sweden, which is within the industrialized world, probably a place where women have, well, definitely a place where women have higher status, but they're still functioning within a dominant patriarchy that has been rising, particularly for these last 500 years. So I think learning, at least from this particular indigenous culture, I know that it wasn't perfect. And as you said, Pat, in the past, there was also conflict and friction. This was also not a perfectly level system. The elites had taken people into war, but it was very minimal. And I guess particularly, above all, suicide was virtually non-existent, something that might have happened in a lifetime. Depression was unknown. People couldn't understand, what do I mean by this illness that exists in the West, where you have to have special doctors who try to deal with your deep unhappiness. And the absolute and key lesson from this Bible was the intergenerational community structure as the foundational body for shaping people's identity. This intergenerational structure, where every mother had about 10 live-in caretakers for every child, shaped an identity where the child was so secure that the individualism that we talk about is actually a desperate attempt to prove that we exist, to prove that we deserve to be heard, that we deserve to be loved and recognized. So when you have that secure basket of relationships, you are creating a soul, a being that is so secure that there is no need to develop this structure of egoic, I'm going to prove myself, I really need to be heard, so I'm going to go out there and fight for it. And I'm going to be ignoring others. I don't need to listen to others. So I just want to really stress that vital importance of intergenerational community. And I would argue that as we move forward, for me, the sacred activism is, of course, paying attention to that inner life, to that need to create, as Shilpa was saying, helping, caring, loving people who in turn help us on that path. But as we try to heal ourselves, the inner wounds, and then look out at that intergenerational community structure is so much more important than what's being recognized now, where we look often at nature and the communities within nature. But I think we really need to be looking much more at the evidence from indigenous nature-based human beings. That's where the lessons, I think, become much clearer. In terms of the dominant system also, I just want to say that the trade treaties are a central trajectory whereby monopolistic corporations and banks have gained more and more power over our governments, over our worldview. As you were saying, Alnoor, we have to look at every single word that comes out in the mainstream media And every single item that gets circulated widely on the social media with skepticism, the ideas that get out, the voices that get out have lots of money behind them. And by definition, they are part of the problem. However, where I would slightly disagree with you, Alnoor, is I think we have to compromise and try to get our voices out, because I see that to the extent that we've helped to rebuild community-based economies, particularly around food, we have actually helped to create systems that answer the spiritual inner needs, the needs for biodiversity of nature, the needs also now of a sort of lifeboat. So getting out the message that, hey, if you get together and start building the local economy with that focus on the most important aspect of all, which is food, with the diversified food economy, which happens when you shorten the distances between the market and the farm, you're also beginning to look at different water management, you're looking at afforestation, and you are it's an unbelievably win-win healing process. So I better stop there. I hope I haven't taken too much time. Lots more to say, and I hope that we can all have more conversation and that we will get more people to listen. And I want to assure you wonderful speakers here that there will be more people hearing what you've said today, because this is of course being recorded and it's going to be disseminated. And we do have people in 30 countries putting on World Localization Day events. We have had the support of, I wish if I have time later, I want to tell you a bit about my conversations with Gabor Mate, which was so affirming for me and so wonderful to hear from his wisdom. And this wide program will be disseminated and circulated around the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helena. I guess at this point, would any of you, Pat, Shilpa, or Alnoor, care to reply to anything you heard from Helena or from each other, or just have sort of an open discussion? Anything that's burning in your mind that you'd like to get out now before we move into some audience questions?
Maybe I could just do a quick response to Helena's point. Yeah. When I say, study and be critical of the dominant culture, I'm not saying that we can't use the means of production and propaganda against itself. But I would just be detached from the outcome, talking about the structural causes of violence, racism, oppression, etc., is not the best means of getting a Wikipedia page or selling a book, but it should be done, right? And we have to use the organs of neoliberalism against itself, because for all its ills and shadows, it interconnected us in shallow but important ways. And then also just to say, I recently heard a talk between Pat and Gabor Mate as part of Science and Non-Duality did a session on trauma, and I highly recommend it. I think there was a couple of really critical points that were made, and one on the victim-perpetrator cycle that I think Pat said, and Pat, I don't want to speak for you or repeat it, so do you want to say it yourself around, do you know what I'm saying? There was this line, I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but essentially like, what I don't heal in myself, I transmit to others, and then that becomes the completion of the genocide. And I think that it just, when you said it and the way you said it, just really like hit me. And yeah, as we talk about sacred activism, I thought maybe that's also something to bring into the field. But you can correct my lack of articulation, Pat.
Yeah, I was just saying that if I don't heal, I will complete the genocide. And, thinking and speaking about the lateral violence of traumatized communities, I was saying, and if I prevent others from healing, I also complete the genocide. Yeah.
I think the only thing I would add to this, which is really important conversation, is like, I can really notice each moment that I am perpetuating separatism and separation. Every single time, this like us, them, and it's so subtle, and yet it keeps coming, and I noticed that. And you're talking a little bit earlier about like the mind, Alnoor, like the mind's role and the mind thinking that it can be the one to really solve this and fix it and do it. And I have to keep reminding myself, my mind is like probably the least effective instrument in this entire thing. And how do I start to shift the source of wisdom towards my heart, towards my spirit, towards my body, really start to tune in that and work with others and play with others and explore with others, how that healing of our heart wisdom, how that healing, healing of our hearts to unleash the heart wisdom, the healing of our bodies to unleash the body wisdom and our spirits, how we can do that together. And I think that work of really shifting from the mind that wants to constantly divide towards the heart that can see the whole, towards the spirit that can see the oneness, like all of that work, and play and joy that can be there, as well as challenge. I just want to remind myself of that and just name that here, that's a lot of the sacred work to me.
Pat, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. So yes, thank you, Shilpa. That's been my big soapbox thing to say is, one, I've had it with genius and brilliant ideas. Our genius and brilliant ideas is what got us right here. And so I want to be led, which means I have to open up to something outside of intellect. This whole world is run on intellect as a primary way of knowing anything, whereas my elders would say that's the least reliable way of knowing anything. And so, so for me, you know, as you're saying that, I say, you know, the mind loves the best. What it loves the best is creating the airtight case, right? And right now, the mind is sort of creating the airtight case for doom. If you do the math, if you follow the logic, you know, it all adds up to doom. And and so I feel like on the one hand, it's horrible. It puts us in that panic zone that you were talking about. But for me, I feel like it can also stretch me then to use my other modalities as human being. And my experience is that when I come to the end of my own resource, that is the moment when the mystery door can swing open and bring in things that never occurred to me because I was only working with one modality. The other thing I wanted to say about the us and them, you know, one thing I was saying prior to the pandemic for a few years was I was telling people, you know, I guess it was Einstein said, you cannot simultaneously prepare for peace and war. And I was saying, but we as activists have to do that. Because on the one hand, we sort of have to keep trying to hold that line as best we can. But the thing is as the changes come down on Earth, all around the Earth, you know, we're talking about weather and such, but in so many different ways, the willingness is going to keep increasing. And with that willingness, the opportunities for things to come together that were previously too proud to come together, too dogmatic to come together, etc. And so on the one hand, we have to be like fighting like hell. And on the other hand, we have to be ready to receive when that dam breaks and receive what was formerly our quote enemies or those on the other side. And so it really does require a lot of us spiritually to be able to hold all of that and be able to welcome in community. And we're just going to see more and more and more of that now.
I completely agree. And that's why I also came up with the terms, we need resistance and renewal. And that in many ways, we need to be creatively schizophrenic, because even in terms of that journey of linking the heart to the mind, we need to practice how we can live in that way, in that loving way, where our embodied knowledge and our community existence can begin to thrive. However, to understand this global economic system that Alnoor and I particularly have been talking about, in a way requires putting on our left brain hat and dissecting intellectually in a very left brain way, something that was created out of that left brain genius, as you were saying, Pat, that genius which was born of over specialization, meaning totally decontextualized knowledge, which from its outset specifically argued that we have to torture nature for her secrets. We have to look very skeptically at the foundations of this science. And then I think we have to, again, with the rather left brain analysis, we have to distinguish between a respect for sort of the basic principle of sort of proving one's hypotheses, but we then have to recognize that what's been going on, particularly for the last 30, 40 years, is that it is big money. It's actually giant institutions as powerful as governments that have been funding research in order to make profit, whether it's in the pharmaceutical industry, whether it's in the food industry, whether it's in the learning industry of schooling. And so there, that sort of is a rather intellectual journey that where the heart can't help us very much. I know for me, the wake up of that was after Chernobyl, when I was meeting with what was my tribe at that time, was a group called Ecoropa, Ecological Europe. We were meeting on a beautiful May day in Bonn, actually in Germany. And, you know, sun was shining, we wanted to be out on the grass. And then over the radio comes the message, whatever you do, don't go outside, don't go outside. And I realized we are now in a world where my body is no longer a guide for the right way to do things. It's a longer story, but I just want to say again, with my Ladakis, traditional people, their embodied knowledge, which created the food and the houses and the clothing and everything they did with nature, they were able to keep heart and mind together in discerning what was right and wrong, because again, they were living in a way where that trial and error had been going on slowly for thousands of years. I hope that makes sense a bit. A lot more to say about it. It's very complex.
Okay, well, we have about, I think, a half an hour or so left. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll just transition to a couple of the questions that have come in. A couple of them I will start with that I think I can sort of put to all of you, asking sort of about what sorts of changes, and this is from an anonymous attendee, so that's okay. What change would each of you like to see in activists and their approaches? I guess related to this notion of sacred activism, and perhaps sort of detecting a bit of something lacking in the way that activism conventionally has typically been going on. So what changes would you recommend in activism?
I think, you know, archetypically what's been happening in these 45 years that I've been at it is that the archetypical activist was paying no attention to inner transformation, was often acting out of too much of a left brain and fearful position, and often very much othering people who didn't conform to the same thinking. So on the other side, we've seen a development of more spiritual awakening in the West, which had been, of course, cut off with modernity. And as people started discovering the magic of meditation, of deeper, you know, silencing the chattering mind, people were, you know, convinced this is the way to change the world. And it's just about creating inner peace, and then we'll have peace in the outer world. And in that new age spiritual world, people were very anti-activist. They looked down on the activists as these primitive people who didn't understand how to change the world. And of course, the activists were looking down on the new age people. So it's been really wonderful to see that there has been, in the last decade particularly, I guess, a coming together where, you know, the benefits of shutting down the chattering mind, of chanting, of yoga, of meditation are now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. So to me, this is beginning to change, and And as Pat was saying, I think we're going to see not only this coming together of previous sort of camps, inner work, outer work, coming together, but we're seeing now too in our work how left and right are also coming together about a shared concern for the quality of their food, for what's happening to the natural world, the livelihoods for their children. So there is a coming together that, yeah, we're trying to build on that. And in the localization movement, we see a lot of that worldwide.
Thank you, Helena. Anyone else care to take a stab at that one? Or, I mean, for me, I'll just, if it's okay, I'll just chime in. For me, a sort of ongoing perennial puzzle in this regard is sort of like, if we live in a hurt world and we're hurt because of the world is hurt, you know, how to first get out of that. You know, it's like a structural condition that also manifests itself in our own dispositions, right? And if we're so deeply sort of conditioned by the system that Al-Noor talked about and Helen talked about, for example, how can we reanimize, you know, if we've been so alienated from the earth for so long? No, so I guess for me, this broad question is, how do we initiate this process in the first instance if we're so deeply into it, you know, inside of it? Because it's almost like to begin to engage in sacred activism would almost require a different world. But, you know, so it kind of this chicken and egg question for me.
I would argue very strongly that it's about sitting in circle. I've been arguing for years that we can learn from Alcoholics Anonymous, which was able to deal with entrenched addiction in a very effective way by building community and with a spiritual core, which was Christian. Now, as things are moving forward, it's becoming the community, the shared journey with other human beings connected to nature. So these, everywhere I look, I see examples of how effective that can be. So I really urge everyone to explore that, and I urge everyone to join a circle of some kind. And for us, it's quite important, again, from indigenous culture, that this circle shouldn't be too big. It needs to be a circle where everyone can have a voice, so up to maybe 25 people. And what we would also urge is that we encourage a journey where this becomes a group of people with whom you can meet regularly near where you live. So you start also building systems of real support, real interdependence. And within this crazy, destructive world, we can do that, and people are doing that, even in the big cities, where it's of course needed more than anywhere else.
I think Shilpa was going to say something.
Anyways, thank you, Alnoor. Yeah, Alex, and thank you, Helena, for what you just shared as well. I think it's a couple things, right? One thing that was really coming to me is like the tendency, and Pat was sharing this too, like the tendency for activists to always go to the worst case scenario, the hardest situation, the most entrenched or negative, you know, the furthest extreme. And like, that's the person I have to try to like work with and figure things out with. And like, that's the, and I had to really shift myself from that, because that was such an entrenched practice in my own early activism. I'm like, oh, think of the worst case scenario all the time. And then I started to flip it and be like, actually, that's not even how systems change happens. It's not from the most resistant. It's from the middle, which is usually undecided or unclear. And so started to shift into like, okay, can I start with the innovators, the people who are willing to try, the people who are willing to open themselves and see what their hurt is and how they can heal it and how they can do that in community and be in nature together. And okay, let me start there. And then started to connect, and this is some of, you know, Malcolm Gladwell's work of like, oh, then they're the early adopters. They're not the first people, but they're the second folks, the third folks, you know, they're ready to try. And then there's the later adopters, the people who are like, I just needed to see it happen for a few years. Now I'm ready to try. And that stretch zone collectively starts to grow, right? Where it's like, maybe it was initially just a few folks who whatever grace, came into their own lives to let them go ahead and be there to try. They weren't the only ones, and they started to connect and link up. And then there's early adopters and the later adopters. And then the idea that by the time you hit the early resistors, the people who are just kind of like not so sure, but maybe, I don't know, actually the systems change starts to happen. And so that's one thing I would just invite us is like, as part of sacred activism, is why do many people want to start with the hardest situation first and like try to break our heads on that situation, is what we would say in Hindi, like, bust our heads open trying to work with the hardest thing. Whereas maybe there are many more people in the middle, or just a little bit, a little bit closer to the path, a little bit. And that as we can stretch the system out more and more shifts and change can happen. The other thing I wanted to offer is that, and this is also something I really had to unlearn in my own work, and in Shikshantar's work, like it was a big shift to go from critical analysis constantly to appreciative inquiry, and to find a place to like ask questions that could lead to more and more possibilities and more inclusion. And I remember many years ago thinking like, this is something absurd that I'm like, oh, 5% of the people in the world are going to solve the issues that 95% of the people are consistently creating. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. How do we engage more people? And it's like meeting people where they're at and asking questions about what they care about, not just like hammering home my point and my idea and my way. And what I saw with the critical analysis constantly is that people got paralyzed, they got depressed, they felt disconnected, they didn't feel like they had any power, they could not face a massive system. There's nothing for me to do there. But then somehow with the appreciative inquiry, starting to ask questions about like, oh, what do you care about? What do you love? Where do you want to pour your love? What is it that makes you come alive? Who do you want to be in connection with in this community? How can you start to build? And that shifted, and people got on fire, and things started to move and shift and grow. So I really want to also encourage and temper the levels of critical analysis, not saying that they're not important, just like recognizing what it takes us towards and what it also takes us away from. And a lot of our work in Shikshantar, we had to make that massive shift to move towards more and more appreciative inquiry. And the last thing I'll say is just like the sense that there's many roads, many paths can come together in activism. And many years ago, through Joanna Macy's work, I'm so glad she was mentioned here. She's such a beloved elder, and some other friends. They put together sort of an idea of the 4 R's. I'm just going to show a really quick image of that since y'all are enjoying some of these little visuals. But the idea that there are many places to come together, and instead of debating, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is the only way, can we start to come into relationship between these many different ways? And so just one framework, not saying it's the only one, but this idea that there's reform, there's people who are working within the system, trying to mitigate the harm, the struggle, and trying to make micro changes. There's resist, people who are working to stop, like holding actions, Standing Rock being a beautiful example of that, saying like, no more, ya basta, this is enough, and really holding a line of like, we can't have any more violation happening here. There are people who are working on the recreating, trying to generate, create and recreate, bringing back indigenous systems, bringing back other ways of knowing and understanding and generating things that only make sense now in our time to try to evolve and create and offer possibilities. And there are people doing imagining and reimagining, bringing back, this is the realm of the artists and the academics and the creatives in different ways. And not to make these, exclusive categories in some way. It's just to start to notice that there are these different threads and streams. And I know in a lot of my activism, I really was taught to like, not really care about the other ones, or really think that they were wrong, or really think that they were off, or really think that they were limited. And the truth is they're each limited and they're each magical. They each have power. And so how can I start to see them? How can activists start to see, hey, maybe we can weave more. Maybe I can be so grateful. I'm so grateful for my friends who are in public schools really working to try to bring love and care to the kids there. Even though I know I can't be there, that's not my place, but I'm so grateful that they're there. Can I bring gratitude? Can I bring appreciation? Can I bring upliftment? And can I bring the possibility to weave ourselves more together? So I'll just offer that as some things that have really helped me in my own activism journey to make some important shifts.
Thank you, Shilpa. I love that concept of the collective stretch zone. Maybe you should add a few other giraffes to the image as a, because I really think it's so important that we, I mean, obviously we can't begin to heal the world unless we are well, but we also cannot be well in isolation. And so I think that's one of the major themes of this discussion, right, is connection. And that actually relates to one of the other, a point that came in from Lowell about sort of the difficulty, I think, of connecting with people sometimes. And really, I guess, yeah, and this, I think, relates back to what I was trying to say as well, as like, in this society where some of us are located, you know, the contemporary Western technological world, we're so alienated from one another. You know, I mean, it's almost it's sort of a joke, sad joke now that many people don't even know their next door neighbors, you know, after years and years of living in the same place. So, you know, given this level of deep isolation, which is, I mean, systematically reinforced by all these technologies and the whole structure of the system, how can we, you know, I mean, I appreciate what Helena said about, you know, join a group, join a circle, but I think even that step is really challenging for a lot of people. So I think that that's something for all of us to dwell upon, is how do we create those spaces, but also how do we bring people and bring ourselves into them. So yeah, does anyone have some further thoughts on that particular theme before we, please?
Yeah, just a little bit. And this kind of goes to connecting with others. So what I would love to see activists do is throw a better party, dang it. Like, like it's always like force by opposition. It's like, no, we got to learn how to throw better parties, right? To be able to, you know, attraction rather than promotion way. And so I think about that a lot. And I feel like really in many ways, that's what happened at Standing Rock. They welcomed people and they honored them. They welcomed them by smudging them off and bringing them to the fire. And man, people were missing that, or maybe had never experienced that. And then the flags that were going down the main boulevard as you enter from all the nations, you got to bring your flag. I mean, it was just, I mean, there was a lot of hardship there, right? But there was also a better party going on there in so many ways. So there was that, but also I was going to say, you know, I really feel like I wish that we could feel more effective. Like even this meeting, like a lot of Zoom calls, I have to start out, and I didn't try to do it here, but by making a dedication and say, you know, let this conversation be fully participating in the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. Let it travel, let it ripple, let it, you know, so in my spiritual belief, like all of that is absolutely possible every single time if we will take the moment to make that dedication, if we will say we are available and open for this possibility. And if we don't say it, then not necessarily, because, you know, there's this whole free will clause business. But so in that sense, I feel like so many times as I'm sitting in meetings, people will say like, but we haven't done anything, we haven't got anywhere. So I feel like we really have to change our measuring stick from being so outward And as you say, Shilpa, affecting the very farthest reaches on the farthest oppositional side. And if it's not touching there, then we've done nothing. And I'm like, no, we're doing a lot. You know, and my grandfather said, you know, we are suffering from a crisis of relationship right now. And so as even as we're, quote, preaching to the choir, as we're changing our consciousness with each other, and deepening those relationships, and as you point out, Shilpa, bringing in those who aren't so far away from us, but still really making some tight connections there, just in that medium distance away, that changes things a lot. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, a big prayer that I make all the time, and this goes back to me being done with genius and brilliant ideas on the part of humans, but not on the part of the rest of life, not on the part of spirit. Those I'm very open to. That's what I mean by I want to be led. And so my spirit guides have said, your understanding of cause and effect is rudimentary. They're scolding me. It's rudimentary. And I'm like, okay, I believe you. So then I say, I make myself available then teach me. What else can I understand about cause and effect? So I'll just say this one piece. The first thing they said to me when I expressed willingness is they said, well, first of all, if all times are happening at the same time, what is possible? Like, what if you were to change your whole framework that way? And I was like, well, gosh, sounds like a lot would be possible, right? So they're introducing things that are the way we've been using our logic hasn't even been able to allow in. But the other thing that they've said to me is, rather than try to tell that news story going forward, we'd be better off retelling the old story. And if you go back and retell the old story, you will automatically change your trajectory into the future. It can be no other way. So I think that they said that because I don't think we're equipped to tell a new story. We're still trying to tell a new story from this being embedded in the same, as you're pointing out, Alex, the same story. So what are we equipped to do? It doesn't mean we can't do anything. We can go back and revisit, you know, what my spirit helpers term archetypal woundings of humanity, places in our history that we get to re-examine with 2020 hindsight and retell that story. And just like if you do that in personal therapy, if you retell an old traumatic story in a whole new way, suddenly the whole vista changes. Things that must have been there the whole time suddenly they leap out at you. So we can do that collectively. So I really hope that we can move in those kinds of directions.
Fantastic. Archetypal wounding of humanity is such a powerful term. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Alnoor, so we
haven't heard from you.
Wanted to hear a bit more from you, Alnoor.
I thought we were trying to answer questions, but I'm happy to jump in on that or go to the next question as you feel, Alex.
Yeah, maybe I think I can wrap there weren't too many questions, but I can wrap one more that came into this because I think it's quite related. It was the first question that came actually from someone named Phil Baluk. Phil asked, basically, I'll just paraphrase briefly. He's talking about how renewable energy is very important in the transition that we need to make, but that alone is not enough. We also need to realize that we need to have an economic contraction. You know, we actually have to use less. And I think, you know, that kind of harks back to what I was trying to say about the way this technological system enables us to be separate. In part is because of it's a high energy system that enables us not to need our neighbors so directly. So I think like the necessary transition we have to make is going to include a reconnection that also involves like less of technology maybe, or less of energy consumption. So yeah, that was the other question that came in. So maybe if you want to riff on that and whatever else, yeah, that came to mind. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe we can wrap the last couple of questions together, because you know, even this idea of let's just take extreme positions for a second, and we say, okay, you know, technology has the answers, right? Not that anyone is saying that, at least anyone sane. But if we were to take that position for a second and say, well, actually, like technology is a subset of capitalism, right? A few people are deciding where investment money goes and what the research and development budget of humanity is, et cetera, et cetera. And to what end are they doing it? Well, like for the prime directive of capitalism, which is to increase capital, right? And then we say the other extreme, and we say like ancient knowledge is going to solve our problems. And then what it does is it brings up the fear of especially the spiritually orphaned, which is largely the West, which is like we don't have any memory of that, and I don't want to go back to quote unquote whatever primitive Paleolithic lifestyles, etc. And to connect the two, I think what I wouldn't even say what I want to see in activism. What I think is sort of evolving, and what we're being initiated into is non-dualistic thought, and to hold multiple simultaneous, seemingly conflictual ideas at the same time. That even just to touch on a few themes that have come up, right? Is it head versus heart? Well, maybe it's the rewiring of the neocortex in service to love in ways that cannot be quantified or binaried or made dualistic, right? Is it like ancient wisdom, or is it undiscovered technology? Well, maybe it's a fusion of the two. It's like remembering in a future time. Like, to go back to Pat's point, maybe there's simultaneous realities and futures happening now. And even this idea of like focusing on how bad it is, maybe understanding the shadow in its full truth and its full depth, and the insanity of this current moment is necessary to open our ability to navigate the future. And that this idea that we have to somehow be optimistic or not talk about a dying planet is going to somehow save us is, again, the desire for Western comfort and linear thought. And something more is being asked of us right now. I don't fully know what that is, but I think everyone in their own way, if we would avail ourselves to those multiple languages and those multiple conversations, and engage in even potentially silence, that we would be given information, and we would be able to comprehend non-dualistic thought in a way that didn't feel so jarring, because I don't think it has to be as difficult as it is. And yet somehow, we managed to make this a much more torturous process, right? And the consequences of that are not just happening in our body and for us, it's happening for the entire web of life that we're interconnected with. And so, yeah, whatever we're doing is not working. And that's also okay, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Alnoor. Really important thoughts there. We just have a couple minutes left, so I guess at this point I will take the opportunity to give all of you sort of the opportunity to, for a last word, if you want, like a minute or so each. Totally up to you, not obligatory. And Helena, also hadn't heard from you as well for a minute, if you wanted to respond to some of the thoughts that have come in.
Anybody else first?
We'll just hop on what you were just saying, Alnoor, and just say that, I feel we are making it very hard. And I keep thinking, the dominant theme here on this place that we find ourselves, this Mother Earth, it's life. Like, that's the whole plan. If we look around, every single thing is doing one thing. It's making more life, making more life, making more life. So for us to to head towards life and not keep trying to head towards death, that ought to end up being like floating down the river, I would imagine, in some way. So yeah, that's a thought that I work with a lot.
Well, I'm very happy to follow on from that, because as far as I'm concerned, the fundamental principle of life is diversity. Is this amazing uniqueness of everything that lives, every leaf, every individual, and not only that thriving and alive diversity, the uniqueness, but changing from moment to moment. From where we're standing, the dominant system that has been growing for the last 500 years, because of scale, because of the global nature of driving people away from nature into cities where they had no contact with life. And the amazing thing in the cities, you're driven in there, crowded on top of other humans, and you suddenly don't even know them because it's so unnatural. So this system drove us into structures that can only deal in monoculture. And that system has become more and more blind to diversity and incapable of dealing with diversity. So if you look at them just simply what's happening in farming, you know, this whole system pushing people off the land, replacing them with machinery, with so-called cheap fossil fuels, and expanding larger and larger monocultures, destroying the small diversified food systems, the forestry, the fishery, amalgamation into monoculture. So in the economic system, we have a mechanism that is dealing in death. It is imposing monoculture. For us, it is so crystal clear that central to the path forward towards life is the decentralization and localization where we adapt to that diversity. So I hope that this message will get out more and more widely, because it actually opens up so many clear avenues of action and activism once we recognize the need to scale down the unit of economic activity. And it doesn't have to be about some idealistic new gift economy. It doesn't have to be a system that totally does away with money. It doesn't have to be co-ops instead of private businesses. But the scale is fundamental. The scale and the adaptation to the specifics of place, meaning the specifics of culture, to the extent that we still have cultural diversity. And it is, I think, part of what helps is to hang out a lot in the so-called third world, where there is still so much more of that fabric alive. When part of our fear and our clinging on to this idea of this Western system as being humanity and being the only way, is that we're very locked in the West into this monocultural system. So hanging out and celebrating and partying and hanging out in the non-Western world is a very, very helpful, I think, to open our eyes. Let's pray that COVID allows us, that COVID goes away so we can have more of that face-to-face exchange and deep dialogue and real cultural exchange. Hopefully our World Localization Day is helping to do that a bit through the Zoom technology, but ultimately we do need to learn from one another face-to-face in that embodied and deeper, slower way. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thanks so much, Alex, for doing an excellent job. Shilpa, Pat, Alnoor, love you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Helena. Any final words from you, Shilpa or Alnoor?
I think we're over time.
We're over time, but
yeah,
that's just a construct. That's just a
yes.
construct.
Yeah.
Please, anything else?
Shilpa, please go ahead.
Thank you. I really do want to respect everyone's time. I think the only thing I'll add is about time and the sense that, you know, I think reconfiguring how we look at time, because the sense of urgency is one that can take us into panic zone and then keep us from connecting to all these different time dimensions that are happening in the same moment. And so having seen, miracles happen of people letting go and releasing things that are 50 years old, 75 years old, multiple generations of trauma in 10 minutes of sacred presence from people. It's really flipped my own understanding of what's possible in the time we have. And so I just want to name that and invite that in, that we have the time we need if we bring our presence and our open eyes and open hearts to the moment.
Fabulous. Thank you. Alnoor.
No, just to say that was a beautiful way to close, and thank you. Yeah, shukran, everyone. And have a beautiful night or afternoon or morning or what have you. And see you soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd just like to express my gratitude to all of you. Really inspirational. And yeah, it's been an honor to have you with us. Alnoor, it's been really nice to hear life buzzing away, I believe, in the background of your rainforest.
Yeah, the cicadas say it all.
Yeah, so that was a nice welcome to the cicadas as well.
They're telling us to grow up, I think. That's what they're saying.
Love it. Okay, well, thank you everyone again, and please join more of our World Localization Day events. Take care.
Thank you all. Namaste. Shukriya.
Bye.